Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be making a pet bucket hat, and you can make this bucket hat for both cats and dogs. The pattern comes in multiple sizes, so you should have no problem finding the right fit for your pet. And this project is on the easier side, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, if you are new to the channel, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need a 1/4 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, twill. These are all very common fabrics and they're easy to work with. I'm going to switch it up a bit and use an upholstery fabric. If you choose to use a fabric like this, just be cautious that some of them are loosely woven and they fray very easily. I'm also going to be using a lightweight canvas. The lighter weight ones can be kind of tricky to work with, but like always, test different fabrics and find something that's going to work for you. You'll need a 1/4 yard for the secondary fabric, and this is going to be a lighter weight lining. I'm just using a basic lightweight cotton. I couldn't really find a color I wanted to use that went with the other fabrics I'm using, so I ended up going this route. I would probably recommend using something like a tent fabric or a ripstop. This will help the hat be more durable and a little bit resistant to water. You'll need a 1/4 yard of cord or drawstring. I'm using a standard paracord. You can buy these in sets that come with multiple different styles, so you can really fine tune this to go with your fabrics. Going along with the paracord, you'll need one cord stopper. This is going to be a double opening cord stopper, and the biggest thing here is that you want it to work with your cord or drawstring. So if you're not using paracord, you might want to check the diameter before you order your cord stops. You'll need a 1/4 yard of interfacing. This is optional. You can use it on your brim and top panel. I've made it with and without. It looks good both ways. It really just depends on what type of fabric you're using. If you're using a lighter weight fabric, I definitely recommend using interfacing. You'll need one snap button, and this is to snap the brim up in the front. This is also optional. If you don't plan on adding this feature, you do not need a snap button. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super simple to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. After printing it out, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. And once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. And after taping, your pattern should look like this. For the best results, I recommend checking your printer alignment. And a quick tip, if you already know what size you want to make, you can just select those pages and print that size. After selecting the size you're going to use, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. But if you're still trying to figure out what size to choose for your pet, I made a little chart that should help you out. And it's basically just the circumference and the width. So you're going to choose a circumference that's going to fit around the top of your pet's head and pair that circumference with the appropriate width. Keep in mind you can mix and match the sizes to get the perfect fit. If you're choosing to do so, just make sure you keep the same bottom side panel with the brim panel. This is because the inside circle on the brim only has one size, and that size goes exactly with the same size bottom side panel. Moving on, after cutting, you should end up with 4 top side panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. 2 bottom side panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 top panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. And lastly, 2 brim panels, both cut out of your main fabric. Depending on the weight fabric you're using for the brim, you may want to consider adding interfacing. And I'm going to be using a standard mid-weight adhesive back interfacing. This is optional, so if you don't want to add it to your brim panel, you don't have to. Overall, it's going to make that brim panel a little bit stiffer and look more realistic. Since my interfacing has an adhesive back, I'm going to grab one of my brim panels and place the wrong side to the adhesive side of the interfacing. From here, just simply press it on from the adhesive side. After you get done pressing, we're going to cut the initial shape of the brim out. The biggest thing to keep in mind is pressing it for the right amount of time, or else that interfacing will fall off. From here, we can start the assembly of the brim. So we're going to grab our other brim panel, place the right sides together. As you can see on the pattern, there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the outside edge. So we're going to stitch that exact seam allowance all the way around the outside edge of both of the brim panels. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to double check to make sure all the layers got stitched together. And from here, we're going to flip the right sides out. Try to poke that edge out as good as you can all the way around the outside. And depending on what type of fabric you're using, it really helps to press that edge to really get it flat. From here, we're going to add a couple brim stitches. You can add 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's totally up to you and what look you're going for. I generally like to fit as many as I can within the width of the brim. What I do is start on the outside edge and then keep going in 1/4 inch until I run out of room on the inside of the brim. I was able to squeeze in 4 and I just did a regular straight stitch. Feel free to use a decorative stitch or something fancy to make it look even cooler. As you can see, it really flattens that edge out and gives it a nice strong look. The next step is optional. We're going to be cleaning up that raw edge on the inside of the brim. The first technique is using a serger, and it can be pretty hard to do an inside curve with a standard serger, so another technique is using a zigzag stitch and stitching directly on that edge, mimicking a serge. It's a lot easier to use a zigzag stitch on an inside curve like this, but both of the techniques work great. The main thing we're doing is preventing fraying. From here, we're going to fold the brim in half and mark the centers on both sides. With the centers marked, we're going to grab our paracord or drawstring, cut an 8 to 12 inch strip, and this is determined by the height of your pet's head, so it's best to go a little bit bigger so it's a guaranteed fit. Grab your 2 opening cord stopper and feed your drawstring or parachute cord through the cord stopper. Slide the cord stopper to the center of your paracord. With the stopper and paracord ready, we're going to grab the brim and place the paracord ends on the markings. You want the ends to be pointing towards the center of the circle. Once they're in position, tack them down. Depending on what material cord you're using, you may want to light the ends to prevent it from unraveling. Also, at this point, you can actually pop this on your pet to see if it fits. If it doesn't, you can always resize the cord and try again. Next, we're going to grab the bottom side panels, lay the secondary fabric with right sides facing down, and place the main fabric over top. From here, we're going to serge just the top and bottom edge. If you don't have a serger, feel free to use a zigzag stitch. This step is only to clean up the edges for a cleaner end product. Place the right sides together, lining up the side edge, and stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, flip the right sides out, find the seam, move the seam allowance to the right or the left, and add a top stitch. And it's really up to you what side you want to add the top stitch. With the top stitch complete, we're going to keep working with this panel and grab our complete brim panel. Just like in the previous steps, to get the markings for the paracord, we're going to fold the brim in half the opposite way and add markings. These will become the front and back markings and help us line stuff up in future steps. Grab the complete bottom side panel and we're going to line the back seam up with one of our new markings. We'll be stitching this panel around that inside opening. It can get pretty tricky. It's a tight space to work with, so you maybe just want to stitch it as you go. I found that doing this and just kind of turning it as you go is the best way to stitch it on. But like always, definitely use your own techniques. If you have good ones, comment them down below. I would love to hear what they are. And if the side panel didn't match the circumference of the inside opening, you may want to check the seam allowance and try again. The next step can be kind of tricky. We're going to find the seam allowance on the inside and we're going to fold it towards the top and stitch directly on top of the bottom panel, adding our top stitch. Be cautious about your drawstring or paracord. Move it out of the way as you sew so you don't accidentally stitch it in with the top stitch. And this is another step you really just want to take your time, go slow, and try to make it look as neat as possible. And to hide any little imperfections, I highly recommend using thread that matches the color of your fabric. And as you can see for the inside, adding this top stitch helps push that inside edge up and make it a little bit more flat. But anyways, we can place this complete panel off to the side and grab our top side panels. To start, we're going to do the same thing we did for the bottom side panel, place the wrong sides together, lining up the outside edge, and serge or zigzag stitch around both of these panels. And again, this is just to prevent any fraying and to make the inside of the hat look a little bit neater. Using the pattern, we're going to locate the hem guide on the side edges, and with this one, we're just going to roll that edge over 1/4 inch. Repeat this for both sides, and do the same thing for the opposite panel. With all 4 pins into position, from here we're going to add our top stitch. And feel free to play around with the distance to the edge to find a spot that works best for you. As long as the hem is stitched down, you should be good to go. Moving on, grab your top panels. And again, this is another step where we're going to be placing the wrong sides together and stitching around the outside edge. So when you have the wrong sides together, stitch around the outside edge, either serging or zigzag stitching. Once you completed the serge or zigzag stitch, we're going to grab the pattern, place it over top of the panel, and mark out the center guides. And this is going to help us line up the top side panels. Before we sew them on, we're going to quickly mark the centers on the top side panels as well. Once you have the centers marked on all the panels, we're going to place the right sides together, lining up the top edge of the side panel with the outside edge of the top panel. Make sure the top side panels are across from one another and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is another one you kind of have to move the panel as you're sewing to get it nice along that curve. Once you have both panels stitched on, we're going to pop the right sides out, find that seam, and instead of just top stitching where the top panels are, we're going to roll the edge over all the way around the outside edge, keeping it as circular as possible. I definitely recommend placing a few pins, and once you have it set, we're going to add our top stitch. This is a little bit tricky, so I highly recommend trying it a couple times so you really perfect it. Mine's definitely not perfect either, but it looks good enough to keep moving on. But with practice, you will get better at this. From here, we're going to grab our complete top panel and our complete brim panel. Find the centers from when we added the bottom side panel. I typically like to use the back seam on the bottom side panel, and we're going to line that seam up with one of the sides on our complete top panel. This side will become the back, so pick the side that looks best and make sure that's on the opposite side up front. Line up the edge on the top and bottom side panel and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching the one side, we got to do the same thing for the opposite side. As you can see, you can't really go straight over to it, so you have to wrap it all the way around, kind of like you're rolling the hat up into a tube. Sew it on from the opposite side. If done correctly, the right side should be together, the panel should be lined up, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. With the stitch complete, we're going to pull the right sides out, and your bucket hat is almost complete. I like to do a quick once over to make sure everything is looking centered and square before I add the final top stitch. If everything is looking good, we're going to do it the same way we did the top. We're going to add a top stitch to both of the top side panels and then roll the open areas over a 1/4 inch. Just like with stitching the bottom side panel on, you kind of have to move the drawstring out of the way as you're stitching so you don't accidentally stitch it in with your top stitch. It can be a little bit tricky, so just take your time, go slow, and try to make it look as neat as possible. At this point, your bucket cap is complete. There are a few more optional steps, but the first thing I want to point out is the top panel. If yours turned out looking a little bit flimsy, I used a lighter weight fabric, so mine definitely does. I don't particularly like the look of it. I recommend adding interfacing to the top panel if you're using a very lightweight fabric. The interfacing will instantly fix that issue and make it look nice and crispy up top. But that's the thing I always say is just test out fabrics. If they don't look good, then use a different fabric. It's really easy to fix or find a different solution. This next step is optional. We're going to be adding a snap button to the brim, so when the pet is wearing it, we can pop it up and get that brim out of the way. The first thing I like to do is kind of find out where I want to place the snap button and how far I want the brim to go up. I want my snap button to fall on the bottom side panel, so I'm going to place it as high as I can on that bottom side panel. Once you found that sweet spot, mark it with chalk, fold the brim up, and mark that spot where it hits the chalk line with chalk. Another thing to keep in mind, make sure your marking is in the center of that brim and the center of that top side panel. Cut or punch out the hole on the bottom panel, slide your snap through the hole, add the top portion to the snap. These snaps come with an easy to use hammer die, and each side has its own die set. If you have a hand press, you can also find the dies that go with the hand press. Place the die inside the opening of the button and hammer it down. This will secure the top part of the snap down, and from here we're just going to double check the bottom to make sure the brim panel lines up. If it's looking good, we're going to snip out the opening, slide the back end of the snap button through the opening, place the opposite side over top, grab the die, and hammer it into position. Sometimes these dies can get mashed if you hit them too hard, so it's always best to test it after you hammer it down. Feel free to add more of these around the cap for a different look. The final step is adding your branding. I just threw mine on the front top side panel. It's super simple. It's a branded strip of leather installed with double-sided rivets. But other than that, your cap is complete, and I just want to go over one more time how to mix and match these panels to make a custom fitting one for your pet. Starting with the bottom side panel, you have to match this with the same size brim panel. But once you picked both of these, you can move on to your top side panel, find the size that's going to work best with you. You can change the height and you can change the width so you get bigger openings. It's really all about fine tuning it to get it to sit on your pet's head without looking too bulky or flopping around. When it comes to the top panel, you can really pick whatever size you want or adjust it to the size that you want to see. The bigger it is, the more it's going to stick out on the edges and go closer to that outside brim, overall giving you a completely different look. I highly recommend playing around with this because you might find a really awesome look. And lastly, when it comes to the brim panel, this is the biggest one because you want that inside circle to actually sit on your pet's head. If it's too small, it's not going to sit correctly, and the same goes for if it's too big. So finding that sweet spot that works for your pet will really make this hat actually work. And technically, there's not a one size fits all for all pets, so I made these sizes so you could interchange them and make that perfect size. So the best thing to do is just play around with it. More than likely, the size will fit. I just wanted to put this information out there so you could easily change it if you need to. Overall, this is a super quick and easy project to make. So in the end, if your pet doesn't like wearing it, you didn't waste too much time or money on supplies. And probably one of the funnest things to do is use the same fabric and style, make yourself a bucket hat so you can all match. And there you have it, your pet bucket hat is complete. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Hopefully you found this pattern and video helpful. It's definitely something I like to do with each video is try to bring something new into the video, a new technique, something that's gonna take your sewing to the next level. And I love to see what you come up with. So tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. But until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.